Hello and welcome to my new DIY mode sewing tutorial. In this video I am going to give you easy step-by-step instructions on to how make a mini organizer all by yourself. If your curiosity is piqued and you want to know how it works, then just stay tuned. Enjoy! The sewing pattern is available in my Etsy shop. It is ready to go, meaning everything is already measured and calculated for you. This way all you need to do is print the pattern and simply cut it out. The perfect project for beginners. Place the pattern on the fabric while making sure that the indicated grain line is in a parallel position to the selve edge. In order to cut the fabric, you must fold the fabric in half once. Line up the pattern where it says, fold, with the folded edge of the fabric. Now cut the fabric. I just used my hand to hold down the fabric and cut around it. Or you can do it a little bit more professionally by pinning down the sewing pattern or drawing around it first. Do this with both fabrics. And this is how the unfolded pieces look. Lay them both on top of each other, right side on right side. This means, placing the two nice-looking sides on one another. Sew a top stitch along the upper edge. In the middle you have to leave a little opening so that you can turn the fabric right side out later. Sew this seam with 1 centimeter to the edge. The seam allowance is already included in the pattern. In order to lock the stitch, stitch 3 stitches forward and 3 stitches back. Then carry on forward until right before the middle, because that's where the opening is supposed to go. Here you must lock the stitch again. Instead of finishing the seam all the way through, bring the needle and the foot up. Push the fabric back so that you are leaving a 5 cm opening. Start the seam after the opening by again using a lock stitch. Sew all the way through and do another lock stitch at the end. The first seam is done. This is what the 2 seams look like now. Unfold the pieces and iron over the seam allowance to flatten it. Now you can close the side seam. Once again, lay the 2 fabric pieces on top of each other, right side on right side, and mark the path with pins. Then it's back to the sewing machine. Close this seam just like the others. Lock the stitch, sew and lock it again. It is important to make sure that you sew the seam allowance down the exact same way as you pressed it and that the fabrics line up nicely. This seam must also be pressed apart. Next, we are going to sew the 2 bottom pieces. This is done the same way as before. Lock the stitch, make sure that the seam is laying flat and lock it again. This is how it looks like now, and these seams need to be pressed apart as well. Since this is a mini organizer, you can't just pull them apart. Therefore, it's best to press them from both sides towards the inside. Pull the fabric apart and place the slits one upon the other and sew the corner. Stitch from above so that you are able to flatly sew down the seam allowance again. Sew this seam with 1 centimeter to the edge again. Lock the stitch in the beginning and lock it again at the end. Repeat this step with all 4 corners. When you are done, cut down the seam allowance by about half. Then you can turn everything right side out. In order to do that, reach through the opening and grab everything you can find on the other side and pull it through. Now shape the corners a little bit. In the case of this organizer, using your fingers should do just fine. Now you can stick both pieces into one another. Flatten the upper corner by pressing it with an iron. Now we are getting to the last seam, which needs to be stitched a little bit differently than the previous ones. I am going to lay the organizer down so I can practically sew it from the inside. Because of the small size of the organizer, this is the best way to do it, because this particular seam is sewn very close to the edge. In this case you don't have to do a lock stitch in the beginning, because we will go all the way around and come back to this spot. Since everything is stitched so close to the edge, we will close up the opening in this step as well. By the way, this is the only seam that will be visible in the end. So you can decide what color thread you'd like to use for this. When you get to the end you can do a lock stitch there. Then you cut off the excess thread and watch it go into my new little trash container or thread collector. Because that's the purpose I had in mind for my new mini organizer. Leave me a comment and let me know what you are planning to use the mini organizer for. Have a lot of fun sewing this project. If you like the video, bless me with a thumbs up and become a subscriber, in case you haven't already subscribed. Also, I'd love to see your finished mini organizer on Instagram. You can tag me with DIY mode patterns in your picture. I'll see you for the next tutorial. Until then, I wish you all the best.